Today we're presenting our last of the 2025-2026 webinar series. This special webinar is actually part of a project that our team did over the last year or so. The project led to the development of the Atlantic Offsite Housing Innovation Roadmap. So it was the project was focused on developing an innovative roadmap to build housing in Canada. And I guess I'll go over the overview first and then dive into it. So just for a schedule of the webinar. So we just did our welcome. We typically would do an introduction to the OCRC and building transformations. We're not going to do that for this just in the interest of time. A lot of people have heard that, but I do encourage folks to check out our other webinars on our website. Roshni just replied to Craig in the chat with a link. That link has all our webinars from the last 5 years or so. And also check out Building Transformations website. They used to be the Canada BIM Council. They have a ton of free content and some good resources for members as well. We'll then introduce Nicole and myself, as well as the project's execution team and the advisory committee. We'll do a presentation, then we'll have a Q&A and discussion afterwards. So if you're having any issues, I actually won't be able to see if you are. So just submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature in the control bar. If you have any issues or difficulty hearing, check out your audio settings. And if you can't get it resolved, just comment in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and Roshni will be on it. As a reminder, all sessions are recorded and on our website as noted. So I'll dive right into it. So as mentioned, today's project's on the Atlantic Offsite Housing Innovation Project. Nicole Odo is joining me shortly. She's our Director of Digital Projects. Many folks who work with the center would know Nicole. She pretty much manages all our industry-led projects on the digital research productivity kind of benchmarking side. And myself, most will know me. I've been with the OCRC for 7+ years now, and Director of Innovation and Ops. I should have mentioned Nicole joined our team as a grad student, I want to say 4 years ago, and has been full-time with the center for a while now as well. So our project team, this is the core project team. A few others were involved, so including myself and Jeff Rankin as the principal investigator, Sadaf Monazeri, Rachel Kotea, Scout McKee, all part of the OCRC team. Caitlin Gillis from Human Nature Connections. You'll notice that there's a sustainability section in the appendix, which Caitlin supported, and Nicole will speak to that in a bit. And Mike Benson, who is an asset management consultant. He does some work with UMB, but also with DCA Consulting. And through his work with UMB, he supported us on the infrastructure civil component of the work. And obviously, Nicole managed the whole project. We were fortunate during the project, and I would have had headshots, but it proved harder to find than I had hoped. But we were fortunate during the project to be supported by an advisory committee. The advisory committee included folks from the 4 Atlantic provinces, the 4 construction associations, as well as the deans of engineering at each of the 4 universities in engineering schools, I should say, in Atlantic Canada. So just quickly, I'll mention a few names who are vital to this. Rashmi Hawley with Housing New Brunswick, Marcy Wiggins with the Government of Nova Scotia, Darryl Bradley, Jason Doyle, Alex DL from Government of PEI, Colleen O'Keefe and her team at Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corp, John Ryan Morrison with the Construction Association New Brunswick, Duncan Williams with, I'm going off, I don't have a script for this, so if I mess anything up, I apologize in advance, but Duncan Williams from Construction Association Nova Scotia, Sam Sanderson from CAPEI, and Ron Deneri from Newfoundland Labrador Construction Association, and then at UMB, Josh Leon from Faculty of Engineering, the Dean of Engineering, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, from Dalhousie, UPEI, and Memorial University. So, the reason why a bit of background on the project, I guess, is we had been in discussions with several provinces and doing work across the region for a while as it related to offsite construction and particularly in residential construction. And that really came to a head following the last federal election. And that coincided with us writing a proposal to the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency to develop a strategy for the Atlantic region because in our opinion, to really overcome the challenges that we face in the region, we have to think of a strategy at a more regional level, not necessarily provincial or even within one local government and municipality. Since 2020, the region has seen rapid population growth. Unfortunately, there's limited housing supply. While we've seen rapid population growth, that didn't necessarily correlate to an increased workforce or lowering the average age of the workforce. Traditional methods alone weren't going to meet the needs of the future, well, present and future for that matter. And when I say traditional methods, I mean conventional construction, stick-built construction. We had to think about more scalable solutions to be a more productive sector and build the housing that we need in the region. Additionally, there's kind of an underlying objective that there's an opportunity for Atlantic Canada to become a real hub for offsite construction and potentially export and look at it as an economic development opportunity. So while that wasn't necessarily the focus, we thought that through this project and through a strategy like this, we would be able to create this supply chain and become leaders in the region. And to be honest, some folks will be familiar with this. New Brunswick has 5 or 6 volumetric modular companies who have been around for anywhere between 30 and 70 years. So they're fairly mature and they've done a lot of work. Nova Scotia has quite a few as well. PEI is growing. Newfoundland Labrador is growing in that capacity too. And as a region, we have a really strong skilled trades workforce. A lot of them do head to Western Canada for parts of their lives and careers for good to make a good living. But in general, we have a really strong skilled trade workforce in Atlantic Canada, and we can really utilize that. We've heard examples of our local companies winning competitive tenders that include shipping full modules from New Brunswick to Ontario, and we're still more affordable than in that case, more affordable than a local manufacturer. So there's a real mature sector here, and it's an opportunity to optimize and grow it. So on the project background, the real key was identifying barriers and opportunities for modern methods of construction in the region. We're going to use modern methods of construction terminology here in this webinar a bit, as well as offsite construction. We'll talk to that on my next slide as to why, but there is a difference, just so folks know, despite what the federal government politicians seem to say, there is a difference between MMC and prefab. We wanted to align efforts across Atlantic provinces and support evidence-based decision-making and outline methods to increase housing supply and capacity in the region. So one thing to keep in mind is this project and us as a center, we aren't advocating or lobbying for prefab or offsite. We're advocating for the best solution for the project. And in some cases that will be conventional, sometimes that will be panelized, sometimes that will be modular, and there will be different materials involved. But the reality is we got to do more with less, and we have to think differently of how we're going to do that. Part of the project, this wasn't really included in the scope, but we decided to undertake it as part of this project. So this was developing the modern methods of construction definition framework. I wanted to acknowledge Sadaf Montezeri in particular, who put a lot of effort into developing this, and Roshni, who's on this call, who supported a lot of the visuals and things. It's available on our website. But what we did is pretty much in 2019, the UK government adopted a definition framework to clarify things around policy, procurement, contracts, and so on. Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, and others followed. And we thought Canada really needs something like this. No one seems to be actively doing it. Let's just do it and include it as part of this project. So essentially, looking at what the UK did, we more or less adopted that and Canadianized it. And again, it's all available on our website, and you can get into the weeds of it. But the first four categories, 1 to 4, are really talking about offsite construction. Category 6 and 7 are on-site, so it's processes or products that increase productivity. If you're in construction sector, you'd probably familiar with insulated concrete forms or ICF. That would be that product, an on-site product that increases productivity. Processes would be like the use of new digital technologies, drones, scanning tools, and so on job sites that increase productivity. And then we included the fifth category of additive manufacturing, and when I say that, I'm thinking more like 3D printing. That was more or less to future-proof the framework. I don't know when we'll start seeing 3D printed homes, let's say in Atlantic Canada, but there are some companies across the region, across the country, particularly in Ontario, that are doing a lot of work in this. So we felt it was important to include. Within that, there are several subcategories, but the easiest way to think about it is volumetric modular are the boxes. That's what, when you think modular, that's what a lot of people would think. Panels are 2D panelized systems. Those can be open or closed, semi-closed, etc. We have prefabricated components, and then we have non-structural assemblies. So while it's not as big in the region here, non-structural assemblies can be things like bathroom pods or kitchen pods. There's a full industry of that outside of Canada. I know of one company in Moncton that I believe has their factory in Moncton and ships everything to Ontario for bathroom and kitchen pods, and that sector is growing in North America. On prefab component systems, I'm thinking things like steel and wood beams and columns, concrete beams and columns, things like that are still prefab in nature, but are not part of a full system. So anyways, I encourage folks to check that out. Build Canada Homes, Department of National Defense, several provincial agencies, and so on have been adopting this terminology. So we're happy to see that. So just diving back into the project, again, the background in our process. So just like most academic institutions would do, we started with our literature review and market research, looking at global MMC practices, status of offsite in Atlantic Canada, the enablers and barriers. We did data collection, so we spoke with industry experts one-on-one, a lot of folks in the development community. We hosted 4 workshops across Atlantic Canada and then 1 virtual. And we did a policy review. So we identified the 4 fastest growing municipalities, which became pretty obvious in each province, and looked at their policies and bylaws to understand how those could be a barrier or enabler to development and ultimately through the lens of prefab and offsite construction. In the workshops, we had over 235 participants, and we'll walk through what we did with them, analyze that data, and then pushed out some results. Here's just a high-level review of housing demand in Atlantic Canada, and just demonstrating the market and the need. Some of this data does come from CMHC and is historically focused on urban centers, so it might not be the best view of the need in Atlantic Canada, but we can tell just by the increase in housing costs, the pressures on our public sector to deliver public and social housing and so on, why it's needed. In terms of status of offsite construction in Atlantic Canada, some of our findings were the strengths. Again, 30 plus years of modular experience. We have a strong manufacturing and trade base, growing regional capacity. Barriers are labor shortage or aging workforce. Transportation constraints are really an issue across the country. We're a large country and a lot of ground to cover. Permitting delays, zoning delays, limited market awareness, cultural change that needs to happen. There's future opportunities around 2.5. We can increase our production growth by 2.5 times just by creating more sustainable demand, increase our housing supply, exports outside of Atlantic Canada, and create new jobs and investment. And that's a key point when we talk about economic development opportunities. Not only to create more factories that build buildings in a factory, ship out. It's also to create that whole supply chain. Not only building materials and those products, which New Brunswick and the Atlantic region have a lot of, but also look at what type of equipment goes into these factories, whether it's framing tables, rail systems, gantry systems, cranes, robotics, automation, software tools. How can we attract some of those European companies to the region and build this economic development, this hub for offsite construction? And that's a huge opportunity. And what's needed, though, is coordinated government action and procurement reform, workforce development, and collaboration across the triple helix model of innovation, which is industry, academia, and government. So more on the data collection side, the enablers and barriers. So essentially, and Nicole will get into this more, but it got broken down into 5 core areas of policy and regulation, finance and insurance, procurement and contracts, workforce and transportation and logistics, and then identifying some of the key barriers and enablers. I'm not going to talk too much about this. Nicole has a lot more detail on this shortly. And furthermore, some lessons learned internationally. So I should have taken a step back and mentioned that in 2025, we wrote a national roadmap that was funded by the National Research Council. In that, we reviewed 7 countries and what they did well or didn't do well, and made recommendations for the country on that. In this, we did a similar methodology, but we focused more on some regions that would be similar to Atlantic Canada in some sense. So New Zealand, Ireland, Scotland, and Sweden. Ireland and New Zealand in particular, be it a bit away from the mainland, if we think about PEI in Newfoundland and Labrador. Sweden being more like leaders in the forestry sector, like our region is, and Scotland, a similar approach with more emphasis on wood construction. Beyond that, our data collection process included the bylaw and policy reviews. So there was a 15-point kind of screening framework that our team, I'll mention Raja and Scout, did the bulk of the review in this, and it was a lot of work. And I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to go through all the bylaws for Halifax Regional Municipality, but there's a lot of them across many different zones, and they went through all of them. So they went through and looked at how do those across these 15 points, collecting the data on the bylaws and policies and what may impede development and housing development in general, as well as offsite construction. As mentioned, we engaged several industry experts, both through one-on-one conversations as well as workshops. There's a breakdown of our industry experts by percentage. So the MMC manufacturers in that light pink, municipalities in gray, general contractors in that darker gray or black, and industry associations by the lightest gray. We did, in some folks might have seen, our advisory committee may have been missing, so to speak, some communities. We didn't want an advisory committee of, say, 50 people, but we did engage, the home builders associations across the provinces, the architecture associations, the engineer associations, some of the trade associations, and so on, mechanical contractors and so on. So those folks were engaged as well as some of the facility management, development, and landlord associations and so on. For our workshops, I mentioned we hosted 5, had 74 people in Halifax, 68 in Moncton, 50 in Charlottetown, just over 20 in St. John's, and 16 virtually. I should mention our numbers in Newfoundland and Labrador may have been a bit lower, as we were there 6 months prior for another project, and we collected some data. So this was kind of a second workshop with a similar methodology, but added more data, larger audience, and so on. So we were able to incorporate, while we took all this data during this project, we have 6-7 years of project data and relationships with over 90 companies across the country that helped inform some of this roadmap as well. So during the workshop, folks were asked, there was several presentations, panel discussions with experts from across the country and so on. But during that, folks were really asked to go through, review all the thematic barrier tables, identify any significant barriers were missing, validate the barriers listed in the tables. They were handed these sheets. There were several breakout sessions. And towards the end of the day, we asked them to create a solution execution template. So while we came with barriers, we asked them to identify more, we asked them to rank them, and then we took the top barriers that were identified in each region, or each province, sorry, and we asked them to do a solution execution template. And what we really wanted to get to is creating tangible initiatives that should be actioned following the roadmap. So here you can see the barriers broken down by subcategory. This is policy and regulatory. You can see how many, there are 9 there in total, and it shows on the right where they were identified or brought up. I should mention, just because it wasn't identified in one location doesn't mean it isn't a barrier. It just might have been missed by that group for that day, or during the voting process might have been not ranked as high, so got missed. But those are 9 there, and they're broken down by subcategory, as you can see on the far left. Financing, insurance, similar thing. There's a lot of discussion around CMHC, a lot of discussion around financing in general. I'm particularly interested in the financing side and how that is the true barrier to innovation in everything we do. Cost structure, incentives and policy, and insurance. Diving into procurement and contracts, competition and market dynamics, design and standards, manufacturing, supply chain, procurement and processes, or the subcategories. Then skilled workforce and skills development. This is both professionals, as in engineers, architects, planners, and so on, which there is a need for more training and education on that front. And if you're interested in getting more training and education, check out our recent LinkedIn post. And then on the other side, the skilled workforce. So changing how they work to build a house and working in a factory and things like that. So there's more, there's quite a bit of barriers or opportunities identified there. And finally, on transportation and logistics, there's about 10 identified there. And as mentioned, we are a large, Atlantic Canada is not huge, but it is a large region with, some significant transportation and logistics constraints, and including a massive moat to one province or both or 2 provinces that make things a bit more difficult. Following that, we looked at what are the top 5 barriers by location, just to get a sense of things. You see skilled workforce shortages came up a lot. Financing came up as the biggest barrier. That's the large deposits and payment schedule issues. I'll just highlight it for folks who are on the call that aren't familiar with this. A lot of, if you're going modular and sometimes even panelized factories, depending on the percentage of work that gets completed in a factory, there's usually a down payment. And with that down payment, so at the time of contract signing, the manufacturer may require a down payment. The reason they're doing that is they're procuring all materials at once, and then they might be building, a 16 unit in 10 days in the factory. So traditional construction payment schedules don't work very well, and the banks aren't ready to offer, currently anyways, to offer financial products for modular or prefab construction that's aligned well. So there's this risk cost trade-off, and it all ties back to our contracts and financing and what the banks and CMHC and others are willing to do. So that was highlighted quite a bit. You see cash flow strain, you see CMHC funding misaligned with prefab, higher costs, and again, that's tied back to the risk cost trade-off. So that's where we've seen a lot of barriers. And then going to the data analysis. So once we had all these barriers, and there are many of them, we started identifying the strategic focus areas and how and the initiatives that we would have to overcome these barriers.
Okay, so as mentioned, these are the strategic focus areas of the roadmap. So these were carried through the data analysis and data collection primarily, and then into the workshops as well. So that's the policy and regulatory frameworks, financing and insurance, procurement models and contracts, skilled workforce and skills development, and transportation and logistics. So with the barriers that were collected, and those solution development templates that Brandon shared earlier, solutions were also collected in these workshops. So I won't go through these in great detail because there's clearly many initiatives, but all of these initiatives were created to address the challenges that were identified. So in terms of policy and regulatory, looking to address the attitudes and knowledge gap, the codes and standards, government coordination, inspections, permitting, and approvals. So all of those initiatives were developed under this category. Also initiatives for the financing insurance to address the challenges with the funding, the cost structure, things like that. Procurement, this had a significant number of initiatives. So there are 2 slides for this one. I do encourage you to just go through the report in detail and look into the details of these various initiatives. There are also the initiatives under skilled workforce and skills development. And lastly, the transportation and logistics as well. So then with these, each of these were then developed even further into a dashboard view that then, so I'll just give you an example here. If we're looking at the financing and insurance with FI1, an example being introduce MMC manufacturer pre-qualification based on CSA A277 certification. The team then took this and then identified these additional things. So where was this identified? Was Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. What barriers is this responding to? Who would be the contributors of this initiative? The metrics to measure if this initiative is successful, as well as the expected timeline, the scope, the ease of implementation, and the impact. Also linking the prerequisite initiatives, so things that have to be done that were also identified before this one can be addressed, and then who would own this ultimately. Something to note for the timeline, short term indicates 1 to 2 years and medium term indicates a timeline of 3 to 5 years. So then with those, all of these initiatives were grouped into either high impact or low to medium impact, as well as ease of implementation from easy to medium to difficult. So when it comes to high impact and medium to difficult ease of implementation, those are strategic investments. So those are the initiatives that they are going to take a bit more strategy in terms of the execution, but they are going to have high impact on the overall. Priority actions, easy to implement, and high impact. So those are some quick wins that the region can have to advance the housing innovation in the area. Targeted improvements falls under the category of easy to implement, low to medium impact, and potential considerations is all of the initiatives that were identified as a bit harder to implement and a bit lower in terms of the impact. So not something to totally remove, but it's going to be out of the 4 quadrants, the last one that we would recommend looking at. So then with these initiatives, a dashboard and overall database for this was established. And the reason for this is we can then track these initiatives. So the idea currently, there are a few different views, the dashboard view, the initiatives view. So the dashboard being what I just showed you, the initiatives being those detailed lists of initiatives, and then the initiative tracking allows us to actually track if one is ongoing, if it's progressing or if it's complete. So essentially the provinces or whoever the owner is for that initiative would submit to us, and we are the owners of this database. So there's a great visual to be able to track progress. You can also filter by the category, whether it's financing, insurance, policy, and regulatory, as well as the subcategory. So those other themes that were coming up under those categories, and then the location by province, and then who the owner would be. So if you're a provincial government and you're looking at initiatives that could fall under your scope of work, you could filter by that. So then considering sustainability and climate change. Sustainability is something that is becoming a requirement and basically a non-negotiable going forward. Our 2030 goal, all new homes are to be net zero ready. And in terms of building sector impact, 18% of Canada's GHG emissions do come from buildings. So our opportunity in Atlantic Canada is to build more homes while improving energy performance, resilience, and occupant health. Now that can all tie into offsite construction or modern methods of construction. Some benefits and their impact, things like factory production results in less material waste. They can really optimize how they're building. Precision manufacturing, better energy performance, improved air tightness, lower energy use, controlled environment, better indoor air quality, design optimization, impact is reduced embodied carbon, and design for disassembly, which the impact is greater material reuse. So in terms of sustainability priorities, looking at policy and regulation, things like green building policies and climate resilient design standards. When it comes to training and education, importance on net zero training, climate resilience training, and energy labeling awareness. For data and information, post-occupancy evaluations and building performance monitoring, and supply chain readiness, looking at local materials and technology availability, and market readiness assessment. So when it came to all of the initiatives, we did identify initiatives that were provincially independent, meaning that the initiatives that were created in terms of potential solution should be looked at on an individual province by province basis, but all of the provinces should be tackling these things. It might just be less of a collaborative effort in some cases. So this maps out year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. And then similarly, but this is for the collaborative implementation roadmap initiatives. So these were initiatives where it was identified it will be beneficial for the provinces to work together, for there to be some working groups to work on these initiatives and get that interprovincial discussion happening. So these have also been mapped out for years 1 to 4. And another recommendation that came out of this research project was the Atlantic Offsite Housing Innovation Network. So this is proposed to be a network that has, and again, this is just a potential organization chart, but this is what has been presented in the report thus far. Still many conversations to happen with regards to this, but a chairperson for the Atlantic MMC Steering Committee and administrative support. And then under that, we have working groups in each of those areas that were identified with a whole list of initiatives that fall under that category. For these working groups, they'll be working on knowledge creation. So really getting into the how of how to do these initiatives, what the impact will be, what it will look like in practice, and then knowledge dissemination. So it could be that you're sharing interprovincially, or if it's a collaborative effort, you're making that standard, and then knowledge mobilization. So getting that information out to others. And also some recommended the working groups, but also potential initiatives for consideration. So based on all of the initiatives that were identified under the various areas or groupings, we have some knowledge creation for financing and procurement, regulatory framework approvals and transportation solutions, market capacity and forecasting, public and industry awareness, and skills training and workforce growth. And that is the end of our presentation. So I will say thank you for coming along with us. We have enjoyed hosting a monthly session from October through now to June, and we'll likely get started up again in the fall. We do upload all of these recordings to our website, and you can also check out all of the recordings from our past sessions there as well. If you are looking for a certificate of attendance, you can scan the QR code here or simply email offsiteconstruction@umb.ca, and we can give you a certificate of attendance if you need that for any professional development hours. And since we have an audience here likely interested in offsite construction methods, we would like to draw attention to our upcoming conference, which is happening in August in the UK at Northumbria University. This is our biennial, is it biennial or biannual? Not sure. Transforming construction with offsite methods and technologies. So you may have previously attended this in Fredericton, but now it is coming over to the UK. So if you can join us there, we would love to have you. And with that, we will thank our sponsors. And I believe that's the last slide. So we can open up the floor to some Q&As.
Don't be shy. Oh, I saw one question come in. What's the capacity utilization rate for maritime MMC? Current output versus what's the main constraint holding utilization below capacity? Okay, I'll read the question better than I just did. Nicole, you can offer your thoughts and I can offer mine after if that works. Yes, no? So the question, everyone can probably see it in the chat. You can use that or use the Q&A feature. Q&A helps us track it a bit better, but Paul will read your question there. So Paul's asking, what's the capacity for maritime modern methods of construction manufacturers? So what's their current output versus capacities? And what's the main constraint holding utilization below capacity? And where would added capital investment help most? Nicole, do you want to tackle that first and I can add?
Yep. So in terms of quantified numbers, I wouldn't have an exact of output versus capacity, but what we have heard is that the modular manufacturers are not operating at capacity. So they do have the ability to produce more. What's holding them back right now seems to be not having that scale. So they can't really plan and deliver a large amount of modules per se. So they don't have that to be able to get the workforce and maybe run more shifts if they needed and have more capacity if they don't know, what the next X amount of months of work is going to look like. So from what I've heard, that has been one of their challenges is, trying to deliver for smaller scale projects versus knowing what their output should be for the coming months. If they tried to deliver at a higher scale to ramp up, can that be maintained by the demand?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So, Paul, Deloitte put out a report a few years ago, and I don't believe most of the data in some of it, but we've done a bit of reaching out to at least the ones that we work with, and I know I thought I saw Josh Dykin's name in there, so he's with East Cut. I'm pretty sure their capacity is ramping up as they expand. Every modular manufacturer that we've worked with, and when I say modular, it's like category 1, so the boxes. This doesn't include the precast concrete, panelized, and so on. They're all either expanding their factory, adding automation, whatever it might be, sometimes adding shifts, in some cases building a brand new factory. And so I think a few years ago, we could say, for the 5 in New Brunswick, it was, say, 2,000. And that was running one roughly 8-hour shift. So running at about 35% of the time. If they went to, say, 3 shifts, I wouldn't say they'd triple capacity. They might go 2.5, 2.3, or 2.5x. So let's say this is New Brunswick alone. So let's say based on current state, if they had sustainable demand, you're at 6,500 to 7,000 units annually. now you start looking at it through, there's more panelized manufacturers. There's we're aware of three relatively new modular companies that we've worked with in Nova Scotia, as well as, East Cut is pretty well known there as well, and they're expanding. Um, so um, the I would say that, the region would, I don't want to put a number on it, but I will also add that when we did an analysis ourselves, so there's something called the Prefab Navigator, and it's a few years ago tried to put a database together of all the companies working in the prefab sector. And so we went through that, and we were looking at it only through modular because that's what was being asked of us at the time. And we tried to look at capacity of all the modular companies across Canada and compare that to New Brunswick. And New Brunswick was punching well above our weight relative to population. We were about 15 to 20%. I would say the region as a whole is punching well above their weight, and it's growing. Our friends on PEI who we've worked with, they've opened new factories recently. Panelized factories are looking to open a new one again, or expand their existing ones. Similar in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're hearing more of the truss companies looking to do more floor cassettes and walls and so on. So that's great to hear. And we are also hearing of startups, which, it's good to have startups who are going to, change the way we do things and have that that North Star for all of us to strive to. The other thing you said on like what's holding back, so Nicole alluded to it, this whole idea of like procuring a program versus procuring a project is rolls off the tongue pretty well, but it's a lot harder in practice. But if you can say, let's use the defense strategy as an example. So between, I think Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you heard it this morning, but I think between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick alone, there's like 1,200 units that have to go up in Greenwood, Halifax, and Gagetown. And that's not including what Build Canada Homes is doing with the provinces. And so if you could procure that at like 250 units each or 300 units each, imagine the economies of scale that you could get. And then at that point, companies could plan out their output over many years. Because in addition to doing these direct tender projects, they're also they have a dealer network, so they have to meet those demands for single family homes and so on and so forth. So you have to plan it well in advance. You can't show up to a factory today and say, "Can I have my home on the production line tomorrow?" Even if you have the down payment right there, like they have to put it in a queue. So there's a lot that goes into it. The other thing I would say, and we don't talk about it enough as a sector, and the government definitely doesn't talk, well, I say government, I mean politicians, talk about it enough, is the capacity of the industry to actually, um, like shipping companies, crane operators, the setting, fit out, stitching of modules and panels. There's a bit of a learning curve, and even if all these manufacturers were to ramp up their capacity, a lot of them don't do the site scope of work. So the the general contractors and the site builders would have to learn. And unfortunately, what might happen in that process is some projects may go poorly because of how they were done on site, not anything to do with what happened in the factory. And as a result, it's going to reflect poorly on this sector. So we have to balance that. Like, there's a learning curve for some of the industry. We have to build up capacity, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't lead to air leakage, water problems, anything like that, and document the best ways to do it. There are some innovative organizations that their most senior people are documenting this. They're building AI agents to educate their more junior staff and talk about their supers and the PMs and the tradespeople so they can learn on how to install this. So that whole I'm more concerned about capacity of once it leaves the factory right now, to be honest, than the capacity of the manufacturers themselves. Um, So next is from Kara. Do you have a timeline for standing up the network? Do you want to answer that, Nicole, or do you want me to?
Uh, well, I don't know that we have an exact timeline, but we do know our next steps for getting things underway. So we do have a meeting that we need to schedule with ACOA and with our advisory board, and then talk about what those next steps look like, which I don't know if you want
Yeah.
to add to that, Brandon.
Yeah, I will. Ako's on the call, but I won't put them on the spot. I think there's some pressure right now to build off the momentum and get the network moving. We've actually had some private companies from the finance sector come forward and say, we want to put some money behind this initiative. Where can we go to it for it? So, um, yeah, as Nicole mentioned, next step is to meet with ACOA and the advisory committee. If you go through the initiatives, there is a lot of actions that would be on the public sector officials, whether it's municipalities or provincial governments, and a lot of them are, budgets are tight, they're over capacity. A lot of them are going through reorgs and things like that. So we have to be mindful of that and have to figure out like how can we support them with resources and whatnot. Um, but the next step, Kara, is to pull that together. And I mean, if you're interested in getting involved in some way, I think there's a role for the economic development agencies in each province as well. It would be great to chat about that offline. Your second question on did you come across any examples of stick builders who moved over to MMC? Yes. So actually, a lot of the mature ones in New Brunswick, anyways, they started as stick builders back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Um, we've some recent ones. There was a mostly landlord developer in Nova Scotia who recently opened a factory. We supported them with that. I won't put Josh on the spot either, but I believe East Cut's ramped up quite a bit, and I believe they did stick built as well historically and did a variety. And there are several large companies currently who have done a mix of prefab but are exploring volumetric modular, and if they were to get into that, it would be a pretty big game changer for the region, not only for housing, but for healthcare and schools as well. Oh, and I didn't mention there was like two or three others in the last, mostly during the pandemic. I think some of the constraints because of the pandemic led them to look at how they could prefab more. And I know a company in Miramichi, which was, three or four tradespeople that then started building a warehouse and then they got CSA certified and expanded from there. So they're in the last 5 years, it's been fairly common. Troy. So, assuming a complex modular conversation, multi-unit or multi-story, and the concept of that backlog will generate investment in our industry, what would you suggest Atlantic Canada governments to advance MMC? Want to handle that first, Nicole?
Is it bad to say I don't? I can add to yours if you want to start.
Okay. Um, so there's a couple things, Troy. I, I think, I mean, a lot of the initiatives are there for the provincial governments to look at. Um, a lot of them already have, like they accept CSA 277. They encourage the authorities having jurisdiction or the local governments to, if that's accepted, let's um, uh, if those manufacturers are certified, then we're good to go. Maybe prioritizing, and this is more for the AHJs, not really at a provincial level, but prioritizing um, MMC solutions when they're looking at permitting, zoning, and different things like that. Now, in an investment at a project level, if they could get to that whole idea of procuring a program, it won't happen overnight. I mean, a lot of the provincial housing corps here, shouldn't say a lot, but I'm guessing the majority haven't had huge capital budgets until the last 5 or 6 years because the population was more or less declining in every province in Atlantic Canada. So they mostly had an O&M budget to maintain existing housing stock, and it was fairly reactive. And that was that. So all of a sudden, I'll speak to my home province in particular. In 2022, they announced 100 million for 380 units. That's capital budget. And they had to ramp up a team. They had to recreate the housing corp, which fell under Service New Brunswick historically and so that whole piece had to happen. What I would suggest they do, and this isn't because it's coming from you, but they should, if they're going to action these, do a pilot or several pilots, partnering with construction managers or people who have done this. Don't project manage it yourself. Don't procure it yourself. Don't start from scratch. There's, provinces across Atlantic or across Canada have learned some lessons. So go to them and say, do we hire? How do we procure this? Do we use a collaborative procurement model? What's the financing mechanism that you used? What was the project team like? How early did you engage the manufacturer? All that stuff. I think looking through collaborative procurement, performance-based code, maybe being open to evolving some of those technical specifications so that you can really leverage economies of scale with modular. Those are all things that they should be exploring and have been identified. That was a very long answer, but Nicole, did I miss anything?
No, I think that covers it. And I think that what we've heard from a lot of people is if you have a project team and then you can keep repeating, it's just one of those things where if you keep repeating, maybe the first one's not going to go 100% how you expected, but you're going to keep learning. And when it comes to governments, if you can't maintain that project team and the same people involved in every project, then at least a real commitment to documenting the process and the lessons learned so that at least you can take that forward into the next one, and just getting the right people in the room before things start. Because I think, as we all know, maybe not all know, but most are familiar when it comes to modern methods, you do have to start those conversations early, and a lot of things have to be pre-established and predefined a lot earlier. So yeah, lessons learned from that to take forward into other projects.
Yeah. The other thought I just had, just because I read the next question, is on the education side. A lot of, particularly the skilled trades programs, fall under provincial governments and like post-secondary education training and labor departments. And so, we announced the Advanced Methods of Construction certificate today, but we've been talking about it for a while. That is really targeting the professionals, like PMs, engineers, architects, planners, etc., building officials. But the trades, that's governed by the province, and the curriculum's governed by the province. So they should really start to explore this. In Europe, I think some private sector entities got fed up and just created their own college, and they came together and did that and created a college for industrialized construction or whatever they called it. And so we need to do that. We've suggested that to some groups before, and at the time they didn't quite get it. It was 5 or 6 years ago. I think now with the momentum we have, there will be more emphasis in that, and I think there's the projects that are related, but they can also play a role on the education side. And go to Ryan. Which Canadian institutions are leading the way in training the next generation of workers, not necessarily established skilled trades unions and builder associations, for net zero ready home construction, and how has your research shown they can best learn from each other? It's a good question. For universities, I mean, again, not for the skilled trades, it would be ourselves, McGill, Waterloo, Alberta, UBC, ATS. I saw Carlo Carbone on the call. He's with UQAM in Montreal. He's one of the quiet leaders of this sector for many, many years. So from a university side, it would be that, Ryan. In the north, I'm familiar with a college in the Yukon. I'm partnered with an indigenous community to create a prefab. They actually have a factory and build homes for the community as part of their training curriculum. They're, I don't think they're quite looking at net zero, or they weren't when we spoke to them last. Um, but I know the colleges in Atlantic Canada talk quite a bit and are collaborating, and we talk to MBCC. So we're hoping that maybe something can come out of that. But to be honest, and if I think JR had to leave from CANB, a lot of it may fall back on the training programs that the construction associations offer. Moncton Northeast has a strong training program for like the Gold Seal program for the skilled trades to continue learning. Cairns has a really strong one in Nova Scotia. I think PEI leverages New Brunswick's, and Newfoundland Labrador Construction Association have that too. Um, but they're focused on institutional, commercial, and industrial sector as well. So it's one of many priorities for them. So it's probably an answer that this network that gets created needs to find a solution for, to be honest. Did you have any thoughts, Nicole? Or
Nope, you covered it.
okay. So Luke Balmer asked, what opportunities might panelized retrofitting manufacturers bring? Would this space offer an increased utilization of the production lines? What supports are needed to ensure MMC retrofit solutions are easily understood and adopted? Yeah, so Luke's talk for folks in the audience who may not be familiar with like retrofitting. So Energy Sprong is a program from Europe. It's like my understanding, Luke, jump in if I'm wrong here, but it's you retrofit from the exterior. I think a lot of associations and government bodies have explored, the marriage of prefab and retrofitting and the huge opportunity. There's a massive housing and building stock across the country that needs to be retrofitted to meet those 2030 goals. And so that is, I think, a huge opportunity for the sector. Right now, we've been so focused on building new, but a lot of these manufacturers are looking at how do we, if we're increasing automation, we're increasing productivity, we can build panels that will go to our modular plant, but also go direct to site to get the traditional builders using panels. They can start looking at a production line or a product, I should say, for like retrofits, exterior retrofits. We're doing a project here at our Living Labs that's going to explore this, and we're going to partner with manufacturers who are interested in this area and try to come up with solutions that are strong for retrofitting and for panelized manufacturing. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do there, Luke, I think, and I don't know if the sector is looking at it as much as we probably should be. Paul, a pilot for what? Like, what would the pilot deliver? So, Paul, I mean, so if you look up what the Canadian Mental Health Association did in 2021, 2022, they delivered a 28-unit modular in Charlottetown. That project team has since done many projects. But they documented a lot of data and documented it as a case study, which was a good pilot, which led to some lessons learned. I don't know if all provinces have done that and provincial governments have done that. I will applaud PEI in particular. They're doing 2 6 stories, and I think if they're willing to share lessons learned, that will be fantastic for the sector, not only in Atlantic Canada but across the country. But yeah, and we could start by maybe let's procure 50 units at once in a competitive way and see what the benefits are across the 6 or 7 KPIs that we track. For example, that could be a start, but I'm sure you have thoughts too, and we could talk about that offline. We are nearing time, so there's just one more question, I think, and then we'll go from there. So last question is, are you looking at other jurisdictions outside of Canada, USA, as to the progress they're achieving for MMC modular in terms of skills certification, operational excellence, low carbon materials, etc.? We looked at it a bit, not as we looked at it more like a policy and what did other countries, particularly in Europe, undertake to build their prefab industry. Um, we are doing a discovery trip to Sweden later in the year. So we're hoping to learn more from that and answer some of those questions that you have. And while we're in England, so Helena Ludlow from Sweden, Pam Bell from New Zealand, Matthew Aitchison from Australia, and a handful from the UK. We're meeting in parallel to discuss some of the stuff. And I think there will be some US folks there as well. But yeah, that is some of what we're doing too. So anyways, if you have any other questions, you can reach out to offsiteconstruction@umb.ca, or many of you would have my email address. So feel free to send us an email. Otherwise, we hope you'll keep an eye on the network and hopefully get involved, as these initiatives are going to take a big lift from a lot of people. So we appreciate it. And Nicole just posted the roadmap there. It's available in both official languages. So there's the 257-page roadmap, and then there's a shorter policy brief, and then a 3-page summary that folks can check out. Thank you.